As some of you know, I just returned from 2 weeks at the URJ, the Reform Movement's Olin-Sang-Ruby Union Institute, a Reform Movement's camp in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. And serving on camp faculty is awesome. It starts about 7:30 in the morning with services and goes till about 10-something or maybe even 11 at night, planning for the next day. It involves everything from being present for campers and counselors and staff to leading services to doing who knows what, like rock climbing and biking, and finding really cool moments to teach Judaism in interactive ways outside. So I'll tell you about one of those times, or a few of those times. It was July 4th. 46 campers, 15 staff, and 2 rabbis were sitting at the picnic tables in what is called downstairs, meaning down the hill at camp. We're in the tent living units. And suddenly 3 men showed up at the lunch table. They looked surprisingly like 3 of the counselors. However, they introduced themselves as Thomas Jefferson, David Ben-Gurion, and Moses. They were dressed to the nines, of course, because if anyone knows about Patty Mason and Lisa Greene and family education, we have a great closet of costumes here at North Shore Congregation Israel. So it was July 4th, right? So who better to discuss the concept of covenant, the theme for our month at camp, than David Ben-Gurion, Thomas Jefferson, and Moses? It was on Independence Day. Moses, of course, as you might guess, spoke about Sinai. You know, he went up the mountain, he brought down the commandments, and the entire people gathered at the foot of the mountain, and they affirmed the commitment. They said, we'll do everything that God told us. That is, they'll follow the rules to make a just and compassionate society and maintain that thing called a brit, or covenant, a relationship between the Israelite community and God. Thomas Jefferson told us, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, we know he meant women too, right, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, familiar words. And what followed in the Declaration, as you may recall, was the colonies not only declaring their independence from Britain, but their citizens and their leadership's commitment to support this declaration with, and I quote, a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. They said, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Another, different statement of commitment, or covenant, even if the founding fathers didn't call it that. David Ben-Gurion read from Israel's 1948 Declaration of Independence. I'll read you a little bit of that. First, he said, we declare that with effect from the moment of the termination of the British mandate, for then it was tonight, it was Erev Shabbat, and tonight, the eve of the Sabbath, the 6th of ER, that is the 15th of May, 1948, until the establishment of the elected regular authorities of the state, the People's Council shall act as the provisional council of the state, and it shall be the provisional government of the Jewish state, to be called Israel. They further committed in that statement that the state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of race, religion, or sex. And so it continued. All of these were statements, if not called covenant, probably only Sinai was called covenant, but statements really of covenant, of mutual responsibility and commitment. What followed at camp that day, because learning May official schedule at camp changes on Shabbat, but doesn't change on July 4th, even though the rest of the country stops. What followed was a great study with our teenage campers about the nature of these 3 documents and what they taught us. And then we talked about what does covenant mean, because I'm guessing most people here aren't thinking about covenant on a daily basis, and if you're 12 or 13, you're really not. but we thought about what does it mean to make commitments to others in your lives. Covenant was indeed the theme of this unit, and over the course of the month, for which I was there for 2 weeks, the campers, counselors, and faculty explored what that meant in the larger Jewish sense, and also we, the faculty, tried to bring that idea to a personal place for our teenage campers, right? How do you take covenant and bring it to 13-year-olds, and how do you give it meaning? I mean, we can talk about what it means on Mount Sinai, but that's pretty lofty and far away. For our campers were indeed familiar with Sinai, but they weren't texting generally about what does it mean to be part of the Brit, right? They didn't even have their phones at camp, but they wouldn't have been texting about it. So to make the big idea of covenant personal, we took it into different ways over the course of the few weeks. First, we asked campers to look at key Jewish moments in their lives. We took a big piece of paper with concentric circles and said, place those events in your life, your birth, your bar bat mitzvah, your education, who knows, not just Jewish events. Place them. Does it put you alone, with family, with community, or maybe in the larger Jewish world, to have them just get a sense of connectedness? And then we looked with them, we split into groups, and we looked at different prayers, the language in them, and how they spoke to our Jewish connectedness. Think, for example, about Shabbat Kiddush. We'll sing it a little later this evening. What does it tell us? Shabbat Kiddush reminds us that we're actually part of a covenant. Shabbat is a symbol of the covenant, and it thanks God who gave us the Sabbath as a heritage of the work of creation and as a remembrance of the Exodus. Or think about words of the Haggadah at the Seder. We place ourselves smack in the middle of Jewish history from slavery to freedom. It's our experience, but it's everyone's experience. If you've been at a Jewish wedding lately, you might have heard the Sheva Brachot, or you would have heard the Sheva Brachot chanted, the 7 wedding blessings. And the 7th of those blessings says that when bride and groom stand together, all Israel, meaning all the Jewish people in and outside of the land, rejoice together with bride and groom. And so it continues if we looked at our life cycle and holiday prayers. Even the Aliyah, the blessings for the Torah, we talk about that God has given us the Torah, that we who stand there may be individuals, but we're part of a larger whole. So it goes. In another lesson, we looked at Leviticus 19, the holiness code, or the Torah portion, Kedoshim. In those verses, we, just like our ancestors, are commanded to be holy because God is holy. As many of you know, that Torah portion then gives a really great how-to list for being holy. How do you be holy? Honor your parents. Observe Shabbat. Show deference to your elders. Carry out your business ethically. Provide for those in need in our community. Small groups of campers then divided up and studied these texts, and each of them then chose a mitzvah from this section, put it on a pretty piece of paper and decorated a little sack, and we gave it to them to take with them, hopefully to carry with them as a remembrance and as an inspiration to continue to try to be holy in their acts, in their daily lives. And lastly, we reviewed Moses' journey from infancy to leadership. We highlighted stops. We made a big Moses timeline along his journey. Think about it. He was born, fortunately survived because his sister put him in a basket in the Nile. He was picked up. He grew up in Pharaoh's household. He was later kicked out of that household because he stood up against an Egyptian who was attacking an Israelite, kicked out of the community. He came back and then was a shepherd in the wilderness when God came and said, go tell Pharaoh, you know, that famous refrain, let my people go. At different moments in Moses' journey, he challenged God. He dialogued with the people. He took an incredible amount of kvetching from the people, right? They didn't like the food. They didn't like the water. They didn't like leaving Egypt. He showed anger. He showed forgiveness. He depicted bravery and humility. And so our campers looked at these stories, and they made posters that exemplified what they thought were the vision, the lessons, the values from these. And the next day, they created their own personal timelines, their reflections on their lives, on learning, growth, achievement, and challenge. And each reflected on the story of their life, the moments they had experienced thus far. This is very similar to our Torah portion this Shabbat. We begin the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, which actually are words. Devarim begins, Elah ha-Devarim. These are the words that Moses spoke to Israel, to the Jewish people, what he spoke in the wilderness. Moses then recounts in an exquisite version. I encourage you to look at the story, exquisite storytelling, the history of our people in short form through the wilderness, the peaks and valleys, and the instructions and guidance they got from God throughout as they wrestled with their responsibility and their journey and had highs and lows. It's a beautiful portion that culminates with Moses reminding the people that they're about to enter the land that God gave them and that Joshua will lead them. Joshua, who has seen the events that Moses just recounted with his own eyes, what God has done for the people. So I invite you to take Devarim to heart. Certainly turn to the words and look at them in the coming days, maybe over Shabbat. But do something else. I invite you to do what my campers did. Create your own Jewish timeline. Might be a spiritual timeline, a Jewish timeline, a life timeline, a timeline of faith and doubt, a timeline of highs and lows, of learning, growth, whatever you want to call it. But think back. Think about your life, moments of conviction, moments of struggle, moments of faith, moments of forgiveness, moments of joy, moments of revelation, moments perhaps of communal connection or aloneness, moments of covenant and commitment, moments of who knows. They might be ordinary moments or sacred moments, big or small. But think about, create your timeline, be it in your head or on a piece of paper or whatever it is, and think about what you learn. Remember, reflect, and learn from the Devarim, from the words, and the moments, the stories that are your life. Elah ha-Devarim, these are the words. These are the stories of our people as a whole, and these are the stories of each of our lives. Shabbat Shalom.